My son looked me straight in the eyes, slid the truck keys into his pocket, and said, "Dad, I can't sell it. It's all I have." The doctor was standing only a few feet away when those words landed like a punch. He lowered his head without saying anything. I already knew what that silence meant. Without the surgery, I didn't have much time left. I wasn't asking my son for a gift. That truck had cost almost $70,000, and every dollar came from years of my overtime shifts. I bought it for him after he graduated because I wanted him to have a better start than I ever did. I skipped vacations, worked weekends, and ignored my own health so I could hand him those keys with a smile. Watching him protect that truck more than my life hurt in a way no illness ever could. He crossed his arms and avoided looking at me again. "You don't understand. If I sell it now, I'll lose money. I need it for work. I'll figure something else out." "That isn't another way," I quietly replied. "The hospital needs the payment before they schedule the operation." He looked at his phone, sighed, and said, "I'm sorry, Dad." Those 3 words sounded empty. As he walked away from the hospital room, I noticed someone standing outside the door. It was my old friend Michael. We had owned a small construction company together almost 30 years ago, before I retired. He didn't say a word. He had heard everything. Michael stepped inside after my son disappeared down the hallway. "I never thought I'd see that," he said softly. I forced a weak smile. "Neither did I." He pulled a chair closer to my bed. "Are you going to tell him?" I slowly shook my head. "No," I answered. "Not yet." Michael stared at me for a long moment before nodding. He knew exactly what I meant because he was one of only 2 people alive who knew the truth, a truth my son had never bothered to ask about. Everyone believed I was just a retired father living on a small pension after selling my share of the business years ago. That wasn't the whole story. Hidden inside a sealed envelope, locked in my lawyer's office for nearly 12 years, was something that could change my son's future forever. I had planned to hand it to him on my 70th birthday, believing he would value family more than money. After what I had just witnessed, I wasn't sure he deserved to see what was inside. As Michael quietly stood to leave, he looked back at me and said, "Sometimes people don't realize what they threw away until it's too late." I looked toward them, hospital window where my son's new truck was shining in the parking lot. For the first time in my life, I wondered if saving my son from every hardship had been the biggest mistake I had ever made. He left the hospital believing the conversation was over. It wasn't. The next morning, my lawyer, Daniel Brooks, walked into my room carrying a thick brown envelope. Michael followed him. Daniel placed the envelope on my bed but didn't open it. "Are you sure?" he asked. I looked at the envelope for several seconds before answering. "I've never been more sure." Daniel nodded. "I'll change the beneficiary today." 3 days later, my surgery happened. Not because my son came back. Not because he sold the truck. Michael paid the hospital himself. I begged him not to. He smiled and said, "You gave me my first job when nobody believed in me. Let me return one favor." The operation was successful. While I was recovering, my son never visited. He texted twice. "How are you? When are you coming home?" Nothing more. No apology. No regret. Only short messages that felt more like obligation than love. A month later, Daniel invited both of us to his office. My son arrived wearing an expensive watch and carrying his truck keys with pride. He smiled when he saw me. "I heard you wanted to update your will." "I do." He leaned back confidently. He already believed he knew what was inside. After all, he was my only child. Daniel opened the envelope. There are 2 documents. The first document showed that 12 years earlier, after selling my construction company, I had quietly invested millions into commercial properties with Michael. Those investments had grown far beyond anyone's expectations. My total estate was now worth over $18 million. My son's face turned white. "Dad, why didn't you ever tell me?" I answered calmly. "I wanted someone to love me before they loved my money." The room became completely silent. Daniel opened the second document. "This is the updated will." My son smiled again. That smile disappeared almost immediately. 90% of my estate would go into a foundation providing emergency medical care for hardworking parents who couldn't afford life-saving treatment. 5% would go to Michael. The remaining 5% would go to my son, only if he completed one condition. He had to spend 1 full year volunteering every weekend at the same hospital, where he left me behind. No salary, no publicity, no shortcuts. If he refused, his share would automatically become part of the charity. He stood up. "You can't do this." "I already did. I'm your son." "And I was your father, lying in a hospital bed while you protected a truck I bought for you." He couldn't answer because it was true. 2 weeks later, he sold the truck. Not because he suddenly needed money, because every time he looked at it, he remembered the choice he had made. For the first time in his life, he started showing up at the hospital at first. Everyone believed he was only there for the inheritance. Maybe he was, but something slowly changed. He helped elderly patients eat. He pushed wheelchairs. He sat with lonely veterans who had no visitors. He watched families cry outside operating rooms. He finally understood what fear looked like and what love really costs. Nearly a year later, he knocked on my front door. He wasn't wearing expensive clothes anymore. He wasn't carrying truck keys. He simply stood there with tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry." No excuses. No blame. Just 2 words. This time, they were real. I hugged him. Not because he earned my money, because he finally found his heart. 6 months after that, Daniel called us both into his office again. Without telling my son beforehand, I had prepared one final envelope. Inside was a letter. It read, "The greatest inheritance I could leave you was never money. It was the chance to become the man I prayed you would be. If you are reading this, you finally chose people over possessions. That's the son I always hoped to raise." Behind the letter was a new will. He would now receive the family home, meaningful keepsakes, and a fair share of my remaining personal estate. The foundation would still receive most of the wealth, because it had already saved hundreds of lives. My son didn't ask about the money. He folded the letter, held it against his chest, and cried. People often say karma is about revenge. I've learned something different. Karma is giving people the chance to face the person they became. Some run from that moment. Some grow because of it. My son almost lost his father over a $70,000 truck. In the end, he found something worth far more than $18 million. He found the kind of character that no amount of money can ever buy.